Welcome to HortTube. My name is Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comment section below this, and that's where we pick from each week. I think we wrote down 23 from this past week, and there were a lot of great questions, so keep asking. We're trying to pick ones that are kind of relevant to what's going on, and there's a ton of questions. So again, thank you guys for participating. The Learn to Garden video series is $50 off for the month of October, and you use the code October to get that, but that's running out of time at this point. So I think there's only about a week left. And again, it's a combination of design related videos, how to start a garden, how to maintain a garden, tools you would use in the garden, all kinds of gardening related content on there, on the Learn to Garden video series. And then the weekly garden planner. What makes it different, it's just basically broken down into weeks of what you might do to maintain an existing garden week over week over week. And there's a $20 off, I think $20 off below the video. There's a code down there for that. If you're interested in the weekly garden planner, week 1 and 2 of November should be up as you're watching this. Those of you who have bought it, we've shot November and December. Haven't even mentioned yet that Arches National Park is up and over that cliff over there, right there behind me, and that the Colorado River is between me and that wall back here. A kind of pretty beautiful setting here. Got Holly out in Utah in very cold air. The 85-degree weather at the house. You know, when we took the trip up around Ontario, got back to the house, there was a bunch of 80-degree days, and anything above about 72, 73 right now, she's just panting like crazy. It's 40 this morning here and getting colder this week. But anyway, we're out here, Holly's with us, and she's good to go when it's 40 degrees outside. And we have a beautiful view here behind us. You can see the sun starting to hit the top of the wall up there as I'm talking. Oh, and I forgot where I was there. The weekly garden planner, we shot November and December, and I'm in the process of getting those completed. So over the next few weeks, you'll see that will fill itself out to the end of the year. Put up a bulb. The 5-Minute Friday video was on bulbs. We're going to have one of these 5-Minute Friday videos every week. Some will be 5 minutes and some will be 14, like the bulb video was. I put up a video we had shot a month and a half ago in Connecticut on a roadside. We just saw this shop that had this beautiful row of plants across the front of it, and we shot that video, just Connecticut roadside video. And then there were a bunch of plant videos, single plant videos that went up. I'm in the process of bringing just in case you haven't heard this yet, bringing the videos from the Garden Plants with Jim Putnam channel over to this channel. Plus there's new ones. And so within the mix, you'll see new videos that were not from the old channel. We shot quite a few before we left the house that are integrated into that. And then that content is going to, all of those videos are going to go into playlists. Like there was one that went up the other day. It was literally in 56 different playlists, and they was for evergreen plants, fragrant flowers, all kinds of things. And then they're broken down into zones. So eventually, there'll be a lot of plants in the Zone 7 fragrant flower playlist, that kind of thing. Zone 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 is how I'm breaking them down, and then fragrant flowers and foliage color, all kinds of things. And so you'll be able to basically use a playlist to pick out plants for different things. It's heading that direction. Let's jump into questions. Somebody's in Zone 6A in Michigan, and their black walnut has produced a ton of nuts this year, and it's been really dry. They heard that fruit and nut trees have a cycle of years they produce more. That's called a mast year. We know oaks do that. A lot of plants do that. And I don't know, black walnuts, if your black walnut's actually having a mast year or if it's having a stress year. Sometimes when plants are under stress, they produce more. Your black walnut, though, is definitely not alone. When we traveled up north of Raleigh and up around Lake Ontario a couple months ago, it was that way everywhere. And then the same thing on the trip this direction out west. Every black walnut we've come across, the ground was just completely littered underneath with black walnut. So it seems to be happening every year. So again, I don't know if it's a mast year situation where they do it every 7 years or so. And the reason fruit and nut trees and and other plants would do this, is if they put out the same amount of fruit or same amount of nuts every year, then the squirrels and other creatures would just consume them all. But by having about every few years having an excess amount, they kind of fool the critters and they don't all get eaten. And so that's the point of that. But again, I don't know if it's having a mast year or if it's just stress because it's just dry everywhere. So I don't know. Somebody said, should Suntastic Pink Abelia be planted now or wait until spring? They got it as a clearance plant. They're in zone 8B, Louisiana. I would definitely go ahead and put it in the ground. Abelia, most of these Abelia are going to be hardy from zone 6 to 9. You may see 6 to 10 occasionally, but 6 to 9 for sure. Zone 6, they tend to get a little thin in the wintertime, but they're still kind of semi-evergreen. Zone 7, 8, 9, very reliably evergreen. You're right in the bottom of, the sweet spot for them where you're definitely not going to have you shouldn't have any kind of winter issue with it. Again, we're going to have the 5-Minute Friday video coming up this week is going to be about planting, what to plant in the fall and what to avoid planting in the fall. So that video will be this next week. If I had to select one evergreen ground cover to plant around conifers, what would it be? So we have a lot of sedum in our garden planted in and around the conifers, and that works pretty well because most of the sedum will stay pretty close to the ground. I mean, really ground hugging. I don't want any of my ground covers to sneak up in the plant and cause any problem with thinning at the bottom. So the sedum work pretty well, but regardless of what ground covers you're using around your conifers, make sure they're not climbing on them, because even my sedum out by the green penguin pine at the street, the green penguin pine video is coming up too. That's another one we shot that hasn't gone up yet. The sedum that we have planted around it did try to get a little sneaky and climb on the pine a little bit this season. So I just go by and literally kind of stomped it down around the, not stomped it, but pushed it down with my foot to get it off of the plant a little bit, and then we cut it back once or twice. So even the most ground hugging type of ground cover like oregano or thyme, those would be two good recommendations as well that stay super, super flat. Even those can try to creep into up in them a little bit. So somebody's in 7B, North Carolina. They want a vine to grow in a chicken coop in the shade. I like 5-leaf akebia or chocolate vine, some people call it. That would be one that you could definitely grow in the shade. Most vines tend to want to have their roots in the shade and then have their tops in the sun. And so the goal of a vine trying to climb on something is to get up into the sunlight. And so most of our, like Carolina jessamine will grow in the shade like that, but it won't ever produce as many flowers or look as good if it can't get up in some direct sun. But I would try 5-leaf akebia. That's one that will work on it. They want to underplant their Empress of China dogwood. Recommendations for something that will help and not compete with it. How far from the trunk? Zone 8A, Athens. Well, you could put, again, that sedum, like I just said. You could use that ground cover St. John's wort that we have at the house, the gold one. You could use any of those things. Eventually, that tree does stay limbed pretty low for a while. It'll eventually limb itself up. I talked about that last week. It'll eventually shade itself out and limb itself up. But in the meantime, it's probably not going to allow ground covers under it all that much just because it's going to shade it out. So I think you'd put them, put something a foot away or more from the trunk, and then it'll grow where it can grow. So the ground cover will go into the spaces where it'll grow, and it won't go into the spaces it can't. That's typically how ground covers work. They'll creep to the light and creep to the places that they can get moisture or whatever it is they need. But again, a sedum will work with that. It would look good with it. And again, it'll creep where it can creep. Ours brigadoon stays out from the loropetalum and the osmanthus behind it. It's a struggle for it to go up under there. It just tries to creep out toward the sunnier locations. Let's see. Number 6. When should you plant a native seedling tree or rooted cutting tree? They have an American persimmon in zone 6B. They've been keeping in containers for 1 to 2 winters. or should they keep it in a container for 1 to 2 winters or plant it in the ground? How long will they need babying? I don't know how big your seedling is at this point, but you could certainly put that thing in the ground in the late winter, early spring. In Zone 6B, I just don't know where you are. You know, that American persimmon is probably native to wherever you're at. And I just don't know the size of it as to whether or not I would put it in the ground now. I would probably wait until late winter, but I would want to go ahead and get it in the ground sooner than later, because, you know, with trees, unless you're growing them in specialized containers where the roots can go deeper, potentially, you know, most of the tree seedlings that folks are doing are in kind of specialized tall, narrow containers a lot of times, and they're using root maker pots so that the roots get to the edge of the container, and then that kind of burns the roots back on the edge of the container to make sure they don't end up becoming extremely root bound. I just don't want you to, if you end up with it too root bound and too long in a container, you can do some long-term damage potentially to the roots being just all wound around themselves. So the sooner you can get it in the ground, the better. And I'd probably just wait until late winter, early spring when the ground's workable and put it in the ground at that point. And then as far as how long it will need to be babied, it completely depends on your summer next year. This year, everything would need to be babied almost everywhere we've traveled this year. It's so dry. I've been crossing the Ohio River and the Missouri River and the Kansas River and the Mississippi River, and, you know, Colorado River's probably about normal for where it should be this time of year. They don't have rain, you know, but downstream, I'm sure it's, you know, it's not making it to Mexico. That's for sure. Let's see. How old does a tree have to be before you stop watering it? It completely, again, depends on where you are in the country. Some things will need to continue to be monitored, you know, well into the future, just because. So I would say, you know, pretty much no one in my 90-year-old neighborhood in Raleigh is watering the trees that are there and existing, you know, at this point. They're not thinking about them at all. You know, the trees that were originally planted in there. But if you're, just the ups and downs of the summers and things that we have and the nature of the trees that you're planting are going to, you know, determine that. Some things just won't ever become drought tolerant to live in a place like I'm standing right now, you know, except for these invasive, some of these invasive plants that are growing along the Colorado River here. That you know, they've got plenty of access to water over there, but it's a difficult question to answer, because when I say something is drought tolerant, I'm generally talking about drought tolerant in the Southeast United States and not in the Southwest, because I'm not in the Southwest, and so it will never necessarily become completely drought tolerant in the Southwest if it's unless it's something that is native to that space or native to South Africa or Australia or someplace where it's similar to the desert Southwest. So these are very difficult questions to answer. Is the plant something that is from an area that's very similar to the area that you're growing it in? So is it native? Obviously that would be similar to the area you're growing in, right? Or is it come from someplace in the world that's similar? A lot of times those things are going to be things that are going to be well established in your area, and you're not going to have to do a lot of ongoing maintenance in the future. But when we're talking about ornamental horticulture, this is where I wanted to get to here. When we're talking about ornamental horticulture versus survival, okay? If I come out here and I plant something in this desert that is from, I wouldn't, but something from South Africa or Australia or that's native to here, and I water it in the ground, water it in a few times, and then it's just kind of on its own, that plant may survive here because it's from here. But does that mean it's going to thrive in our ornamental landscapes, right? That's the difference. Is in ornamental landscaping, 3-4 years in the ground, during a dry season, I may want to water it, because to say something is drought tolerant and will survive without water after it's been in the ground for 2 or 3 years does not mean it's going to thrive in ornamental landscape. So it may need ongoing watering for a long time in the type of landscaping that my channel is about, which is ornamental landscaping. So less and less water over time, but I would never get to a point probably with almost anything in my ornamental landscape in Raleigh that I would go, it's never going to need water again, because that's probably not true. Okay, a lot of words there. So somebody is in zone, okay, I get this question occasionally and I like to readdress it. This person is in, okay, so it's 9 and 9B. Oh no, it's, okay. This is question 8, but it's, they're in 9B. They're confused about zones, selling plants that are zone 8 hardy, like something that's zone 4 to 8, but they're in 9B. Can it be grown because it doesn't get so cold here? So yeah, the zone thing is done by cold, and it doesn't address the heat issue, right? So when we say something is hardy in zone 4 to 8, obviously the 4 part makes sense because that's as far north as it could go based on the cold. But why isn't it hardy the 4 to 11 or 4 to 12? Why is that not the case? And the reason is, most of the time, a couple of things. Obviously, your summer heat. I mean, if something is native to eastern Canada, like Thuja occidentalis, you know, if you try to put that in a place where it's 100 degrees all the time, you know, that is obviously can be an issue. So it can be heat related. You know, just the overall basically 90 days of 100-degree heat that you might have somewhere where that plant is native from, it just wouldn't handle that. And then the other issue is a lot of plants need some period of chill hours where they stay dormant longer during the winter time. So that plant that might be native to, let's say, Vermont, it is on a clock that basically says, hey, from October 15th or November 1st until April 1st, I'm not waking up. So I need all that time. I need a certain amount of time that the temperature stays low so for me to be able to sleep. And so basically it's an interrupted sleep cycle when you're in zone 9B and the plant doesn't know when to go to sleep and it doesn't know when to wake up anymore. And if it doesn't have those chill hours, you'll find that the plant's just less vigorous year over year over year. This is what, you can really see it with bulbs. Bulbs give you a very short window into this. So you can buy your tulip bulbs in zone 9B, you know, from wherever you buy them from. You put them in the refrigerator for 8 weeks. You put them in the ground and they come up beautifully, and they're as good a tulips as you'd find anywhere in the world. And then you leave them in the ground, and the next year they come up, but they come up half as tall and flower about half the height they did the year before, and then the next year they're just gone entirely. And it's because they didn't have those chill hours. They didn't know how to, they're on a clock, and that clock gets interrupted, and it just completely damages, you know, the cycle that plant grows in. So it could be heat related, could be you just don't get winter. So there's different plants, depending on where they came from, have different needs, and that's the reason why that doesn't work in 9B. That's not always true. Not every plant's been tested everywhere, right? And so sometimes it might be worth a shot if it's inexpensive or it's a clearance plant or something like that, to try something. Maybe offer it a bit more shade than the tag says, trying to grow it in 9 so it has some protection. So it's, what I'm saying is it's still not 100% accurate that it may not work for somebody in zone 9. Probably more likely 9A than 9B if it's only hardy to zone 8. Okay, let's see, number 9. They've had a few frost in 7A. Can I now transplant a barberry? Yeah, once it's gotten to the point where it's lost its leaves, that's when I would do it. You know, plants are in the process, and you can see the gold color showing up in some of the plants back here behind me. This they're the Chinese elm and Russian olives, and there are several invasives out here in this part of the West that have really taken over. But those Chinese elms do have really nice yellow color, and you can see that yellow coming in them right now. And you know, the green is disappearing out of the leaf and exposing the actual color of the leaf, which is yellow, and then that drops off. And what's happening is that chlorophyll's being, and all the nutrients that are in those leaves is being pulled down into those roots, and you know, in the process of going dormant. So what we want, if we can, is to have that plant finish that process of bringing those nutrients down into the roots and then transplanting them. with all that said, you could probably, in zone 7A, moved your barberry in July 15th and it would have probably been fine. Barberries tend to be pretty tough plants, but certainly the optimal time would be is after the plant has kind of pulled all its nutrients down in the soil and the leaves have dropped off of it. Okay, so somebody said how to handle matting of hardwood mulch. They're in zone 7A, Tennessee. They've used a rake and poked at it to try to break up just kind of the matted hardwood mulch. And I see this typically, and I don't know because I'm not there, right? Two things, well, what's bad about it being matted down? What's good about it being matted down is you typically get less weeds because it's just harder to come through that crust of that hardwood mulch. But what's bad about it is water will potentially run off the top of it and it doesn't infiltrate, doesn't get down in that mulch. So I can take a water hose at the house and I can stand in the same place with that water hose on for 15 minutes and you just watch water disappear because of the way we prep that soil at the beginning and the way that mulch just grabs that water. So virtually no runoff off of the property whatsoever. If I had that matted mulch though, you'd see when it got dry, you'd see that water hit that matted mulch and just start running across the top and actually run off the property despite having followed, best practices. So you will see this sometimes. It typically though happens when something's been over mulched and you get these dry sockets where the beneficial organisms are basically cut off from the top of that mulch by having a dry pocket in between the soil and the top of that mulch, if that makes any sense. If you pull that mulch back and you see kind of a dry mulch area between them, what you really need to do is let the mulch completely break down, which may get you a little bit weedy, unfortunately, in the short term, potentially. But I think you really need to let that mulch break down and be mostly gone before you remulch in the future. I think that's the kind of key to it. That little 5-part landscape job we did in Raleigh, if you can go back and look at that series of videos, when we started that project, the mulch was like a foot thick. The guy who mulched it, he mulched it twice a year and got paid, forever and ever and ever, till the mulch was this thick. And we could dig through that mulch and it was just dry right in the middle of the mulch and it just wasn't breaking down. And so we did that landscape job. And then at the expense of having a lot of weeds in that garden, we didn't mulch for like 6 months and let that mulch, or longer, and let that mulch break down. Again, it did get a little weedier in the short term, but it allowed that mulch to go away enough. And now it's on a normal mulch cycle, where the mulch is almost gone and then we're remulching. But that is likely what's going on there, is you just have some sort of dry socket between the soil and the top of the mulch, preventing those beneficials from breaking it down properly. Okay, any preferred websites to purchase plants like Ralston viburnum? I really, I don't know who would have that Ralston viburnum online, but it's definitely worth searching for it. We, Plants by Mail is one I've used quite a bit, but I don't think that they grow that one down there. It might be worth trying the Mr. Maple. They tend to have some unusual things occasionally outside of maples, and we've shown unboxing some things from them. But I think that Ralston viburnum will just kind of be everywhere over the next few years. It takes a long time to. And this plant's been around for a while now. It's not like it's a brand new plant, but a lot of times it takes something being spec'd by architects and landscape architects and landscape designers for it to really come into demand. And that big giant planting they have in front of the D.H. Hill Library at NC State is an example of when they come into flower. I mean, people are going to see it. People are going to want it. So it's just a matter of growers realizing that and then getting it, and it'll be everywhere, I think, soon enough. I mean, that plant ours is in mostly shade at the house, and it's incredibly compact. I cut like 3 or 4 crazy limbs off of it this year, but I'm blown away by how well it's performed in the shade. I knew in the sun because I've seen it in sunny areas, but ours in the shade at the house is unbelievable. Okay, somebody's in Dallas, Texas. They're in 7B. I wonder if it's must be north or something. Perennial chrysanthemums is now the time to plant. Should they plant them directly in the ground or overwinter? Tips for care. So the real perennial chrysanthemums, and of course, the little mums that you're buying this time of year to decorate for Halloween and Thanksgiving and that kind of thing are perennials, but they weren't bred to be great outdoor ornamental plants. They just weren't. They were bred to finish in a certain number of days from a rooted cutting in a very controlled fertilizer sunlight situation, so that grower knows on day whatever that plant's going to look a certain way, okay, and that they'll be able to ship them on day whatever. I mean, this is the breeding that's gone into those types of mums. Not a lot of consideration for how they're going to perform in the ground afterwards, and so they're not great perennials, although some people have success with those types of mums in their gardens. But there are lots of great perennial mums, and we saw some of them at the Denver Botanic Garden, at the Missouri Botanic Garden, all over the place. I used to grow one called Miss Sheffield. I just remembered this name. I've been trying to think of it for like 2 weeks. Miss Sheffield's a great one. They're a little bit of a bully in the garden, I will say. So you'll have to have some control of a lot of these perennial mums as they're coming up in the spring. Just kind of control the size of them a bit, and then they just sit there all season. All your other things will be blooming around them, and then out of the blue this time of year they come into flower, and they're beautiful. In terms of when to plant them, you could put them in the ground now. They're super, super cold hardy in Dallas. You won't have any problem putting them in the ground. They're extremely drought tolerant, like really great in a Dallas garden like that. Again, the Denver Botanic Garden, they look absolutely fantastic growing in like scree gardens or gravel gardens. And then tips for care. So with those hardy mums, they'll get a little big. A lot of them will get a little big on you during the summer if you don't cut them back at least once. So I let them come out of the ground, and then sometime around June 15th maybe, you can cut them in half. Certainly by mid-June, you cut them in half, and then they'll flush back out of that and bloom this time of year, slightly more compact for having pruned them. If you never prune them the whole season, they'll probably end up a little bit leggy and tall on you by the time they're in bloom, but still beautiful. Okay, that's the difference kind of between these very ornamental container breeding mum programs and, you know, actual perennial mums. Again, the other ones are perennial too. And we used to give all these instructions at the garden center on how to put these mums in the ground after the season was over, and all the pruning and all the stuff on them. For the millions that get sold every year, there are very few in the landscape anywhere that look good, but there are perennial mums that you can get that do look good. Can you plant perennials in wood chips if you pull chips away from the plant bases? Yes, but I really think that you should let the wood chips break down a little more for herbaceous perennials, even if you are pulling them back a bit. I think giving that space a little more time before you do herbaceous. I have a neighbor, and he's, I know, watches. I don't know if he continues to watch. I have no idea, but we met him in a walk around the neighborhood, and he had done wood chips in his front garden. Beautiful garden he's put in, a fence and all kinds of things. Really, really nice garden. We've walked past it a bunch of times this year as he's developed it. But the herbaceous perennials that he put into that space were probably a little early going into those wood chips, and they're underperformed a bit, okay? They're alive, and it should correct itself this winter as those wood chips break down a little bit more. But I've definitely seen that shrubs and trees perform better in the wood chips for sure, and the herbaceous stuff benefits from the wood chips having been there and broken down and improved the soil. Not all. Some of our native perennials don't like as much organic material, but for the most part, they benefit from it. But they need that stuff to break down a little bit more, become more humus-like before we plant in it. And I think we hope to have a surprise in the Raleigh garden of an slight expansion of the Raleigh garden at some point, and I'm going to show the difference at that time. We're going to use compost for the areas that are going to be herbaceous perennials or annuals, and then we're going to use wood chips for the spaces that are going to be woody shrubs and trees. So somebody said their salvia Mystic Spires seems to have a different wake-up strategy than other perennials. It develops out of the old woody stems, and on windy, cold days in zone 8B in Texas, it causes it to die back. Why? And then they got pruning question, watering, mulching question. Yeah, those, and it's not just Mystic Spires, it's black and blue and a bunch of them. There's a ton of those purple salvias with the black calyxes that are all very similar plants. I mean, very similar breeding. And some of them I don't even know the difference. They're all a little bit of a bully in the garden, but they do tend to wake up early. But keep in mind, it's a, you know, it's a zone 8 to 10 perennial, typically 7B at the coldest. There are lots of salvias that will grow in zones 4 even, 4 and 5 and 6, but there are a lot of them that are only zone 8 hardy or 7B hardy, and this is one of them. That's just kind of the way they wake up. They wake up, get burned, and then they wake up again. That's you know, depending on how your late winter, early spring is. But we've already got a matting of that new foliage under ours at the house. You know, we can see that it's already tried to grow one time, and I think some of that will get killed back to the ground a bit. We have leaves that drop, so one strategy that's probably helped us a bit is we do have leaves in that area, and the leaves end up over top of some of that growth that's come up early. And so that's probably somewhat helpful to keep it from freezing back. In terms of pruning, I prune that thing to the ground almost immediately as soon as it looks bad, as soon as we've gotten a hard freeze on it, just because it doesn't look particularly good. It's not native. It doesn't offer the benefit to any of my native insects out there. It offers benefits when it's in bloom. I mean, all the native bees are on it and hummingbirds are on it and that kind of thing. But in terms of winter standing in the garden, no, I just go ahead and cut that thing back, and the foliage that's down near the ground ends up covered in leaves a little bit. Watering, we really don't water that salvia a whole lot, but in order to keep it, again, this ornamental horticulture versus will it survive? It will definitely survive without you, but it will thrive with some watering when it's abnormally cold. Of course, if you're in zone 8B in Texas, it's probably going to be a somewhat seasonal rainfall as well, where you may not get as much at the times that it needs watering. So if you water it pretty deep and then let it dry out a bit between waterings. Mulching, be careful with these herbaceous perennials, burying them too deep in mulch. But our version of Mystic Spires has got a thin layer of hardwood mulch around it, and it's already up. Like you're pointing out, it's already up a bit in the spring. So we mulch around it carefully. That's a spot we have to do by hand, basically. Somebody said their daffodils came from a reputable seller. In the literature sent, it says to pre-chill the bulbs for 6 to 8 weeks in zone 8A, North Carolina. Person did this with a plan to plant early December. Didn't think we needed to pre-chill daffs in North Carolina. Are they going to perform better because they did this? Yeah, depending on the winter, yeah, if we were not going to end up cold this winter, yeah, your daffodils are probably going to perform better overall. But daffodils are one of the bulbs that need the least amount of pre-chilling. So overall, but there are some that are better for the South than others. And so I don't know, again, they're just putting this general statement on there to pre-chill them, just depending on where you are, just in case you were in zone 9 or 10 or 9B or 10 or something like that. It's very, so on the Color Blends website, you can go and see the southern bulbs, and you can see the daffodils that need the least amount of cold treatment during the winter time. And from zone 8 south, that's probably the daffodils I would stick with. But you probably didn't need to do it regardless. But I will say that if you are ordering even daffodils for the South, which are more reliable, there are a group of them that need less chill hours than others, and that's the ones I would pick from year to year. But yes, with a little bit of extra chill, your daffs will probably perform better than you know, a potential winter where we just don't get that cold, which has been the last lot of years in Raleigh. We've had some extreme cold nights, but we haven't had extended cold at all. Let's see. This person is in 6A. They bought a Stellar Ruby Magnolia. That was one of the videos that went up this week. Although they put it in a fairly protected spot, is there a chance of it getting zapped by an Arctic blast? 100% there's a chance. Yeah, that magnolia, that Michelia type magnolias. Michelia used to be a different genus. It got moved to magnolia, but we just still call them the Michelia type, banana shrub type magnolias. Those are definitely some of the least cold hardy magnolias. So like zone 7B, 8, 9, that kind of thing. So you're in zone 6A. You know, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it should have never necessarily been on the table, but I think if you look at the tag, I think it says 7, probably zone 7 to 9 on the tag. 6A is going to be really tough. That might be a plant that there may not be a protected enough space in your garden, and you may need to move that into. It may be better as a container plant, moving it out in and out of a garage or something like that, ongoing. But this one was, you know, 6A versus 7. That's and it's a leafy evergreen, you know, and it's that Michelia group of magnolias is not known for their being the most cold hardy. Let's see. Tips for planting bulbs in hard pan clay soil. So definitely using a drill bit, you know, is the easiest way to go. Those bulb planting drill bits have been around forever. I sold them at the garden center 40 some years ago. It's like all of a sudden 8 million videos on drill bits for planting things. These things are not new in any way, shape, or form. They've been around forever. And you can get a very inexpensive bulb planting drill bit without paying, you know, for some fancy purple one or whatever. Quick and easy, you can drill those down in the ground. What I would say is if you look at the bulb planting, the bulb video from Friday, as you're watching this on Sunday, that area my buddy had prepped by putting down cardboard and then wood chips on top of that. You don't necessarily need the cardboard, but that was the process he used. And I was able to take a trowel and dig a hole for a bulb, and literally 1.5 feet away in his turf area, I couldn't stab that trowel into the ground if I tried to. So some bed prep and some preparation will have those beds in better shape in the future and make planting into your clay soil much, much easier, just by having earthworms and other things down there that are doing a little bit of work for you. But in the short term, you know, you can dig down into that. If it's a space that stays really wet in the winter, though, avoid planting them there. That's a lot of those tips were in that video on Friday. But definitely, if you have a clay-based soil like this, one of those, and then get a good drill that doesn't, a good drill and an inexpensive bit. That's what I'm going to say. How much of a beast is Feathers Falls Carex? Want to replace a declining heuchera? What is the eventual size? Our Feather Falls Carex is 2 feet tall and 3 feet wide. It is far more aggressive, or I don't want to say aggressive. It's got hybrid vigor in it that is very different than any of the other variegated Carex that I've ever seen in the garden. So it's going to get bigger than your heuchera we're likely going to be, but you can dig it up in the future and just divide it so you can keep it whatever size you want. But it's a great plant, and there's one called Moon Falls that's coming. It's a reverse variegation of Feather Falls. It's awesome. When do plants start going dormant? How is dormancy affected by temperatures going all over the place? So this is back to ornamental horticulture again. Okay, we've got this weird mixture of plants in our gardens that don't exist, you know, in our surrounding area. So if I came out here and we identified the actual native plants that make up this desert area that I'm in next to the Colorado River in Utah, you'll see that most of them are probably, as these nighttime temperatures are in the 40s and upper 30s, they're starting to go to sleep. And also the shortening of the days, the plants know. It may be a shortening of the days, it might be actual temperatures, but in ornamental landscape, ornamental horticulture, it's a little bit different because it's a collection of plants from all over the world typically. Even the things we're calling native probably aren't native to the area, the exact area your garden is in. They're probably native to 3 states over, or some completely different type of area, and they're from a place where they grew in the water or whatever. There's just differences in the conditions that the plants are in your garden. And so some plants are just going to go to sleep very ugly, meaning that it's going to hit 32 degrees and then the plant's just going to get slammed, right? And that's how it's going to go to sleep, because it's just not from your area. It has no idea how to read any signals, right, based on the area that you've put it in. And then other things that are native, you know, we'll get on a cycle of, again, the shorter days, colder temperatures. The soil temperature will be an impact on it. But again, in ornamental horticulture, it's just going to be all over the place, right? In how something is going to how things are reading the signals, right? Just because they're not from that area, and they're not going to read the signals necessarily. Once you've had a couple of nights that are actually below freezing, most everything's going to be pretty dormant in your garden at that point. But that's, you know, it's really hard to read whether something's actually dormant or not if it's not from the area. Number 20, if Buddleia is lush and green going into the winter, is it advisable to cut it back so that it won't split? No, I would leave it like it is. It will, in the ground, typically go to sleep okay and not crack. That doesn't mean it won't crack. I have seen them crack in the ground as well. But it's more of an issue in containers where people are actually pushing them, they've over-fertilized them, that kind of thing. As long as you're not fertilizing it and pushing it in any way, shape, or form, it'll eventually figure it out and get to sleep. So this is an older couple. They're not physically in condition necessarily to mulch the garden, and their garden needs mulching. Is it okay to put some cardboard around their existing shrubs for the winter, just through this winter, to prevent some weeds from happening? Absolutely. Yeah, if you can get some cardboard down on the ground, obviously it won't be the most attractive thing, but it'll get the job done through the winter time, preventing some of those weedy things from coming up. They're struggling at this time to keep up. You know, if you guys, you know, have anyone in your, you know, in your neighborhood, you know, that you see, I'm just going to throw this out. You know, if you see a struggle, you know, it seems to be like they always had this beautiful landscape, and then we've seen a couple of these in our neighborhood over, you know, even the last 5 years or so. You can see the landscape starting to not be the landscape that it was. That may be a time to, you know, that if there's kids in the neighborhood and that kind of thing that can pitch in and help out with some of these things, I think it would be, you know, super helpful. And when I was a kid, you know, we go get a few dollars for, you know, had a lot of elderly people in the neighborhood that I grew up in, and it was just it was an older neighborhood, and you know, we didn't charge much, but you know, my stepbrother and I got out and raked leaves every fall. We mowed in the spring. We weren't charging much, but you know, we were, you know, there's that opportunity too, which just seems like we don't do as much of that as we used to do, either charging or not charging, you know, just helping in general. But if you see this, you know, anything like this, I just wanted to write this down and just absolutely, you know, put the cardboard down, prevent those weeds through the winter, you know, and, you know, make sure that you don't come out of the other side of the winter with more things, you know, out of control potentially. Okay, let's see. Somebody planted dwarf Japanese hollies right before summer heat wave. South-facing side lost all the leaves. Other side appears to be healthy. What to do to help them grow back? I think this is a time-related issue. I'd fertilize them in the late winter. Definitely mulch around them. The problem, and I've said this with dwarf Japanese hollies, I'm guessing these were soft touch. Could be Hellerii. There are several of the, you know, dwarf Japanese hollies. Sky pencil is a Japanese holly, compact Steed's holly, which grows like a Christmas tree. All these are Japanese hollies. They're not great at letting us know when they're dry at all, and they're I see more soft touch. There are more dead soft touch hollies out in the world that have ever been sold than there are living soft touch hollies. I see them all over the place, declining in these heat waves, and it's not necessarily. It's more about that plant's just not good at telling you, and then it loses half its leaves. But these are going to just take time to fill back in. Make sure the area is mulched. Make sure you're watering next year, you know, when they need water. And it may not be the best plant for this space. You know, maybe these need to be moved to a place that's slightly less tough, and, you know, replace them with a Abelia or something that's, you know, dwarf Abelia or something that is definitely up for the challenge. Okay, let's see. One more question for this week. Don't forget the Learn to Garden video series just this week will be $50 off through the end of the month. And the weekly garden planner also has a discount code down below the video. And it's we now have March through the second week of November up, and we'll get the rest of that calendar filled out. And we're going to continue to add to it over time. This isn't so much of a question. It was somebody just wanted to know, they wanted the list of botanical gardens that we have visited as a reference as they approach a retirement. At some point, you know, maybe do that. Maybe I'll make at some point I'll probably do it in video content rather than typing it out somewhere, and just go through some of the what I think are some of the better botanical gardens to visit across the United States. It might be. Let me know down below this video, actually, do you think that's a good idea for a video? Because have been to a lot of them now. And I tell you what, 2 on this trip, that Missouri Botanic Garden and the Denver Botanic Garden are, you know, make me think about re-ranking, you know, my list of what I always considered, you know, kind of the top 5 or top 10 gardens in the country for sure. So thank you guys so much for participating in the garden question and answer video every week, and ask gardening questions in the comments section, and we'll pick from those next week. Thanks.